Mountain Daylight Time, which means it is time to begin. Welcome everyone to the Mileti Effect, which is a special session in honor of Dennis Stephen Mileti. And to begin this session this evening, we're actually going to start with some photographs that have been submitted by friends and family and colleagues from Dennis's from around the world. And so this will be the only PowerPoint that you will be seeing this evening, as Dennis would have wanted it. Thank you again, everyone, for joining this special session in honor of Dennis Mileti. My name is Lori Peak, and I am the director of the Natural Hazards Center, and I was also one of Dennis's students here at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I see many of his other former students on this line, as well as his colleagues and his friends and his collaborators from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who didn't know Dennis Mileti, there isn't enough time in this session to sum up his biography or his life work, but just a few brief words. Dennis Mileti was a luminary in the hazards and disaster field. He led the second assessment of natural hazards for the United States. He was a world-renowned risk communication expert. He was a professor of sociology and a proud sociologist who spent his career first at Colorado State University and then here at the University of Colorado Boulder, where he also served as the director of this center from 1994 until 2003. Dennis spent his entire adult life researching hazards and disasters, mentoring and supporting the next generation of researchers and practitioners, and advocating for moving social science research into action. Tonight, this session is going to be dedicated to sharing memories, telling stories, and we hope a lot more laughter than tears, just as Dennis would have wanted it. First though, we are actually going to have the chance to hear from Dennis. Thanks to Marcia Stein. Marcia Stein is a filmmaker located here in Boulder, Colorado. And it so happened that in 2006, after the Natural Hazards Workshop, Marcia convinced Dennis to sit down for a 90-minute interview. And that interview footage that Marshall took in 2006 has actually never been shared. It's never been seen before, but thanks to Marshall's kindness and generosity, he shared that video footage with us. And as you can imagine, with 90 minutes of video footage with Dennis, it was very hard to select a short clip to share with all of you. But after watching those 90 minutes several times over, I picked a short, about 2-minute clip that I thought sort of captured Dennis's passion, his commitment to risk communication research, and his desire for social change. And so, Jennifer, if you would you please roll the footage on this short clip of Dennis? Thank you.
But that wasn't being done, and I don't know that it's being done at the national level. The question is, what are some of the fundamental building blocks of information that you're aware of that need to get out to the public?
Well, the fundamental information blocks that I'm aware of, we have no information on. We need to do scientific research on. So for example, we don't know where 1/3 of the earthquake faults are in Southern California. Can you believe that? And we could go to every hazard and find examples of things like that, but let's set that aside. The single most important thing to communicate to the public effectively, and by the way, communicating to the public effectively means doing it in a way that gets through all the background noise of ongoing social daily life, that they can hear it, that it registers with them in a way that impacts their behavior. That's not a simple thing to do, but it can be done. We've done it, and Madison Avenue does it all the time when it seeks to sell products. It's not an act of communication, it's an ongoing process. We need to tell them more than anything else what to do about the risk they face. And that's the last thing we typically tell them. Typically, we tell them about the hazard. And we take the opportunity when we're communicating with them to provide them with a science lesson. Well, I gotta tell you, people who live along a creek know it can flood. And people who live in earthquake areas know they can have an earthquake. They don't really need to know a whole lot more than that regarding the hazard. Maybe a few things. The research, the science that's been done, the social science that's been done is clear. If you want to change behavior, you got to tell people what behaviors to take. It sounds like a third grade student would be able to figure that out. But it's not a lesson that's been learned out there. So effectively communicating is getting scientific information in the hands of and in partnership with local emergency managers who then would package it, because they're the ones that can tell the public what they need to do in a way that reaches them in a way that it could be heard.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. And thank you to Marshall Freck for capturing Dennis in this footage. So what we're gonna do now, again, as Dennis would have wanted it, the rest of this time is going to be dedicated to all of you and to you. If you want to share, this is a space for you to share, again, stories, memories, the impact, the effect, the Mileti effect on your life. And we have a few seeds that have been planted out in the audience, a few of Dennis's former students, mentees, and colleagues who agreed to kick this off, because I know it can be hard sometimes to start sharing in this online environment. And so if you would like to share after the first couple of people who've been recruited to get this going, please go ahead and put your name in the chat box, and then I will just call on you as your name appears. But first, we're gonna hear from Jeanette Sutton.
Thanks, Lori. That clip was spot on, perfect. It's hard to follow because the tears. But I first met Dennis in 2000 when I entered the PhD program in sociology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And I've seen him give dozens of talks, and I've had the pleasure of being his last graduate student that he hooded at Boulder. I became a colleague of his in the years that followed. And then he and his husband, Rick, attended my wedding in 2015. You saw the pictures. And I love them both very dearly. It is because of that that it's hard to pare down my comments. But in an effort to talk not only about Dennis, the scholar, but also Dennis, the man, I will talk about how Dennis lived his life in a way that represented the heart of his research on warnings by connecting the two things together. And I have prepared my comments, but I'm going to try to keep them short. So if you've ever seen Dennis give a talk in person, you just saw him speak online, you know that he was a master storyteller. And he was a person who could draw you in and hold your attention. He didn't need slides, nor for the most of his career did he use them. And I saw many times that he would take an envelope that he had literally written out an outline of his 3 main points before going to the podium to speak. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. And you just saw that. So as a scholar who studies warning messages and how they're perceived and acted upon by people who are at risk, we usually talk about the 5 primary categories of hazard content. And if you've read Dennis's work on warnings, you know that those content areas are the hazard, the location, the source, the time, and the most important piece, the guidance. And something that sometimes is not discussed, but it makes just as much of a difference, is how we present that message, how information is delivered. For example, we talk about the need for message clarity that will reduce uncertainty and ambiguity. And not only do you need to tell people about the hazard and what to do, but you need to describe it and tell people how to protect themselves, tell them how to do things. We also talk about the need for message consistency, saying the same thing across many channels over and over to make messages memorable and recognizable like they do on Madison Avenue. And we talk about message certainty, delivering a message with such conviction that you believed it with very little hesitation. And when I think of Dennis's life, I can't help but be reminded of how he lived what he taught others about how to communicate effectively. Because Dennis spoke that way in life. So I remember sitting in his office as a graduate student, and he very clearly instructed me on exactly what he expected of the content of my dissertation, as well as how it was to be presented. He pulled out his yellow lined pad of paper and showed me how the headings needed to be put in the center of the page at the top in all capitals, and then what line to indent and which numbers to include and how the paragraphs were to be set up. And that was message clarity. He was so clear on telling you exactly how to do these things. He was also very consistent, and I knew what to expect from him because he said and did the same things the same way, and that consistency was reassuring. I always knew that a visit to his home in Rancho Mirage, which is located on the San Andreas fault line, it would begin with Folgers coffee in the morning. You would have pickles with your sandwich at lunch, and there would be a martini in the spa at the end of the day, served in a red Solo cup, because you're on top of a fault line, and if it was in glass and it broke, you couldn't take care of yourself. So that's consistency, the consistency of the message. And then finally, certainty. When you heard Dennis speak, you didn't often come away feeling like he wasn't really clear in what he was trying to tell you. He was very, very clear, and he could captivate a room with his clarity. And things were so simple when you heard him explain human beings and human behavior and what we as disaster researchers need to do. I could just hear him before I just heard him with that video clip, Lori, saying human beings live their lives believing they are safe. We have to convince them that they are at risk and then tell them what to do to take action. I heard that in my head before I saw him say it again. And his voice is a beacon of clarity. So I can imagine him today telling us how we could have improved communication during the pandemic. He would have said, be consistent, be clear, and for God's sake, be certain with the information you're sharing with people. I miss Dennis's voice tremendously, and he was a giant among men and a compassionate mentor to this community. So I raise my red solo cap to Dennis. May his memory live in the lessons we put into practice.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for that memory. And I see the chat box is populating quickly to follow you, Jeanette. So we're gonna go to Michelle Wood next, and then Asan, I'm gonna call on you next, and then Larry and Norma, and then I'll start moving down the chat box, Kathleen. So Michelle, thank you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to get to share with so many people who love Dennis today. I met Dennis when I was sitting at my advisor's kitchen table. My advisor was Linda Bork. I was a doctoral student studying HIV at UCLA. I was really well connected. I was doing really exciting research. And on that day, I fell in love with Dennis's mind, his sense of humor, his passion, the joy he took in everything he did. And I was lured away from HIV research to study disasters. And Linda had tried to lure me many, many times to no avail, but I couldn't wait to work with Dennis again. And I had the opportunity to do so very quickly. He was a remarkable mentor. He taught me how to build and test a causal model. He taught me how to write a problem statement so compelling my grandmother would volunteer her monthly income to address it. He taught me how to pack my luggage, organize my desk drawers, cut up a chicken with scissors. If I was listening, he was teaching. He was always, always teaching and giving things away, giving away his ideas, what was in his head. He was a mentor, he was family. I loved him. And I loved Rick. I love Rick. He helped me see how fortunate I am to work with young, vibrant new students and practitioners, and what a gift the opportunity to mentor others is to me. I was on a panel for a group of Australian emergency managers that Lori organized to honor Dennis recently, and I was looking for my notes because I was going to share with you the things I said there. And while I was looking, I ran across a letter I wrote to Dennis 10 years ago. And so I had forgotten all about it. So I decided I'm going to share that instead. I can't remember why I wrote this letter, but it's dated June 15th, 2012. And it's kind of all about the Mileti effect in my life. It says, "Dear Dennis, it is difficult to put into words what you and the mentoring you have provided mean to me. I can't begin to know where to begin. To be sure, you have passed on a great deal of technical expertise from which I have benefited greatly. You were correct in predicting that I would fall in love with causal modeling." That was a joke about prediction in there, by the way. "You certainly have taught me much about ways of learning and knowing how to go about finding answers to the field's pressing questions. All the more important is what you have taught me about figuring out what questions are worth asking. You have passed on a great deal of wisdom about the importance, maintenance, and fruits of personal and professional relationships. How we as disaster researchers relate to one another and to those outside the field certainly contributes to what it is that we're able to accomplish in the effects we're able to realize. Perhaps I'm most grateful to you, however, for the lessons you have shared with me about what it means to dance in the joy of work, how to see the challenges and problems of the disaster field as opportunities to apply oneself, to jump in wholeheartedly, and to revel in the pleasure of developing understanding, clarifying some issue, solving some puzzle, seeing the true form. This gift is something I experience every day with every class I teach, with every student I mentor, every project I undertake, every paper I write, and every new idea I see bloom into fullness of life. These are truly lessons of a lifetime. And I am grateful for them and for you every single day. With highest esteem and much love, Michelle. After that, I wrote a limerick, okay? And I'm not gonna read that limerick, it's a little cheesy, but think about words you know that rhyme with Mileti, okay? And that spaghetti is one, confetti is another. I like to think of Dennis in the present tense, kind of walking through the halls of the Hazards workshop and walking through the halls of the places I've seen him kind of surrounded by confetti. I'm going to summarize by saying Dennis taught me how to experience a whole lot of joy working with people to try to better understand people in ways that could be applied to help people. And in my career and in my life, that has made all the difference in the world. And I so look forward to hearing what other people have to share.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle. And Dennis's longtime colleague, Asan, has to leave shortly. So I'm going to call on Asan next, and then I'm going to call on Norma Anderson. So Asan.
Thank you, Laurie, for giving me the opportunity. My name is Asan Karim, because most of you don't know me. And I'm a professor of structural engineering with interest in natural hazards at Notre Dame. In early part of my career, about mid-80s, I was invited to a committee on natural disasters by the Academies of Sciences. And that used to be the place for natural hazards because they took care of the analysis and everything. When I walked the first day into the meeting, I could recognize all the structural and other types of engineers. And there were few people there, I did not know who they were. And in the first break, I asked somebody, who are these guys? Why are they here? And that was my first introduction to social sciences, because how important that is to take care of holistically the problem we all face with the natural hazard. And that's where I was introduced to Dennis Mileti. And through him later, I met several other people whom I've not had chance lately to meet, like Jay Baker, Ben Aguirre, Dennis Wenger, Claire Rubin. I also participated with Dennis on the second assessment. Some of that was in Estes Park, which is a beautiful place to discuss these issues. Then once I had an opportunity to spend a complete day with him, because between our CND committee meeting and a big disasters conference, there was one day in between. So we both were in Washington, DC. So we spent the whole day going to places, had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. And I learned a lot from him. I really enjoyed his company because you couldn't get bored with him being alone, because he had always something to talk about. He was a meticulously dressed person, which is quite unusual among engineers. But he always impressed me when he walked into the committee meeting with all his cuffed shirts and very nicely put together. So I think I will stop here and thank you for the opportunity. We will miss him, but we will always remember him from his laughing face. Thank you.
Thank you, Asan, so much for that recollection, and thank you for being with us tonight. I know there are several other engineers that Dennis loved collaborating with who are on this call too, so thank you so much. And now we are going to turn it over to Norma Anderson.
Thank you so much, Lori Peak. I met Dennis so many years ago that Dennis had hair, had curly hair. And he and Bill were close friends for many, many years. And so I always look forward to seeing him every July at the Hazards Workshop. He was such a joy and so kind. He was also one, in addition to Bill, one of the most truthful persons I ever met, because he would always tell you the truth. Sometimes he would ask you if you want to know the truth, but that didn't mean that he wasn't going to tell it to you. After I created the Bill Anderson Fund, I asked Dennis if he would join as a board member. And he said, yes, that he would. However, he did say, you know, Norma, I'm retired, but so I don't know how much I have to offer to students. And I said, Dennis, are you kidding? And it was like a joke. But one of the big things he did, he said, we're going to do a fundraiser at the Hazards Workshop. And this was in 2017. He said, Norma, I want you to bring envelopes, self-addressed envelopes, and there are going to be about 500 people there. And he said, I want you to bring an envelope, and I want you to put those envelopes in the seat of every chair. And so this was at a floodplain management program, the Sunday evening, I think it was like 7 o'clock. And so towards the end of his spectacular presentation, he said, I want you to pick up that envelope that was sitting in your chair. And he said, how many of you received money to the National Science Foundation from Bill Anderson? And the hands went up. How many of you were mentored by Bill Anderson? Hands went up. And so he said, I want you, because of that relationship that you had with him and that you value the outcome that has developed with the Bill Anderson Fund, to take out your checkbook and write a check to the Bill Anderson Fund right now. And I tell you, I think we raised $5,000. I was just so thrilled, and it was such a generous thing for him to do. And I'm hoping that Aronde Drakes gets to tell the story that I love to tell about Dennis, and it's so funny, it makes me laugh. And so I will step aside, but he was such a friend before Bill passed, after Bill passed, and I just miss him. I really miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. And for those of us who were in that 2017 session, I don't think we will ever forget that moment. And so thank you for sharing that. And Aronde, if you would like to share, will you drop your name in the chat box? No pressure if you don't want to. And again, I'm seeing it come through in the chat if you put your name in there. So I will definitely call on you. Next up is Larry Larson, who actually hosted that session that Norma just referred to. And so Larry, would you like to share a memory next? And Larry, it does seem, oh, there we go. You want to
hear me now?
Oh, perfect, it came through.
All right. Thank you, Lori, and it's a pleasure to be on this event for Dennis. We all miss him greatly. I kind of like the Andersons. I met Dennis in the early days of the National Hazard workshops that Gilbert White invited us all to. We're all pleased to go to that workshop, and then I was even more pleased when ultimately, we all worked closely with Gilbert. And Gilbert was one of those first people who recognized that he grew up in the 30s and 40s when floods in the nation were really handled by engineers. And he understood the importance of the social aspects of flooding and was always good at recruiting people like Dennis to get into the field. And that was very true. It was very important that we did that. So when I was part of the second assessment when Dennis did the second assessment, along with that big group of 130 other experts, leading to his excellent book, Disasters by Design. So much good information in that. That we can use and still pertinent today because we're not doing the kinds of things to deal with hazards that we ought to be doing. We've known that. I spend most of my time trying to convince people in Washington, D.C. that we're not doing the right things. But it always helps to have people like Dennis around that can lead us to the right kinds of solutions. We would get Dennis to speak at our conferences and other meetings that we did around the nation. People look forward greatly to Dennis's presentation. As everybody said, he was extremely engaging. He was very persuasive. People loved him. So now I want to tell you a little bit side story about Dennis. Now, while we all appreciated Dennis's professional ability and his expertise and all the great things he did to deal with hazards, but you know, as a person, Dennis was very particular. We would invite him to be our keynote speaker, and of course that meant we would pay his way to come to our conference, you know. But Dennis had very specific requirements. I need to be on this flight. I need to get to the hotel at this time. I need to have this kind of a room, and on and on and on. That didn't bother us a bit. We loved spending that extra time so that Dennis was comfortable, so that he was pleased that his time to be there, rather than pay him money to speak, which surely he could have demanded. We just simply said, we'll take care of all your expenses, Dennis, and do it the way you want to do it. And as long as you did it that way, Dennis was wonderful. He was great. We enjoyed doing it. I mean, it was just so excellent. And I want to go to a point that somebody else made about COVID. We think about what we're trying to do today to get people in the nation to get vaccinated. Dennis would be great. He would tell us, you know, you've got to, here's how you've got to approach people, because when people are hesitant to get vaccinated for who knows, a myriad of reasons, we've heard them all, but you can't convince them by certain points. But Dennis would have lots of advice on how we should go about doing that. So those are the kinds of things that Dennis would help us all with. We need him here today for this and the many other things that we deal with in the country. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lori.
Thank you so much for that, Larry, and thank you for, I know Dennis always loved going to the Association of State Floodplain Manager meetings and being a provocateur, and so just thanks for making that happen in the particular way that he asked for it to happen. And so thanks for that. And I have a beautiful missive that was written by Ann Patton that I'm going to read in a couple, after a couple of rounds, but I want to move over to the chat box with some of the people who put their names in there. And so Kathleen, you are next up. Let's see, is Kathleen? Is Kathleen, I'm not seeing, Kathleen, are you still on here? Oh, there you are. Kathleen, I see you are unmuted. Can you, but we're not hearing you right now. Jen, would you maybe send Kathleen the call-in number, because I don't know if she might be having trouble with her computer, but just so we can hear from Kathleen. So Kathleen, I see you're off mute, and we will try to get you on here next. So we're working on the sound with Kathleen. I'm gonna move to Rocky Lopes, who is next up. Rocky.
Hi, Lori, and hi, everybody. It's so good to see such familiar faces after such a long time. We've all shared a lot of stories, and I'm going to give the story about how Dennis and I met. In 1994, 5 years after Loma Prieta earthquake, I was in San Francisco on October 18th, 19th, and 20th for a 5-year memory for the event. And I was in a training session where I was training Red Cross educators, because at the time I was the manager of American Red Cross Disaster Education, on which I built a lot of our education and outreach products on the research that Dennis shared with me, based on everything that he did and many, many others who I respect. So anyway, imagine me being in a classroom filled with eager volunteers and students wanting to know, how do we go out and educate people the right way about earthquakes and other kind of disaster safety? And I was kind of preachy at the time, and I was saying, don't tell people what not to do, tell people what to do. And then I ticked off a list, and I said, such as practice, drop, cover, and hold on. Because we all need to actually practice it, because without practicing it, if it's not something we're familiar with doing, we feel the earth shaking around us, we're going to want to jump out the window. We're not going to drop, cover, and hold on. And so as I conducted this practice, and I was very methodical in stepping people through the practice, and at the end, I asked people, get up now from under your desk, check yourself, make sure you're okay, and look around and check others around you. And I heard this voice, and it wasn't someone in the class, and it was Dennis. He jumped into the room and he did the practice with us, and he was checking his neighbor. And then he turned to me and he says, you're right. You need to tell people what to do, but you also need to practice it. So that's really how we first met. He crawled under a desk in this room that I was teaching in San Francisco. And that is just so classic Dennis. He hears things, he wants to get involved. He wants to see how the practitioners that he engaged are actually applying the research that he alerted us to. I had many, many other stories, and we all do, about Dennis's influence on many things we did. So I'm pleased that I'll be working with Ella Stanley and Suzanne Frew with Lori Peak's cooperation in doing a workshop at the IEM conference this fall, discussing Dennis's influence on the emergency management community overall. And this we do as a tribute, as well as, you know, what we've all learned, how to apply what he's taught us. So thank you for the opportunity to participate tonight, and it's good to see all of you again.
Thank you so much, Rocky. That was wonderful. And I see that Kathleen is back on here now. And so Kathleen, you are next up. Oh, Kathleen, we can see your video, but can't hear the sound.
Kathleen, I just emailed you the phone number. If you wanted to maybe access it that way through your phone, it might be easier.
Thank you, Jen. And Kathleen, I will circle back to you after Howard, who is next up. So Howard Kunrather.
Well, thank you, Lori, and I'm delighted that you're having this because we all remember Dennis in many different ways. He was a giant in the natural hazards field and impacted many researchers, including me, as well as practitioners, with his insights as well as his clear vision. He was interested in other people's ideas and responded with constructive comments that reflected his views on the topic without indicating that he expected you to adopt them. For these reasons, Dennis was admired and respected in the hazards field by everyone I have known. My principal interactions with Dennis were when he was director of the Natural Hazards Research and Applications Center, and he headed up the second assessment of research on natural hazards in the United States that led to a series of books published by the Joseph Henry Press. What I admired particularly was the way that Dennis brought a group of us together to discuss the nature of the research that would be in these publications. And he himself wrote a very important lead volume that highlighted the key findings of the second assessment. Dennis and I had many conversations during the following years on future research issues in the hazards area. He provided me with ideas for studies based on his insight with respect to developing risk management strategies that would have a chance of being implemented if one could bring the key stakeholders together. Dennis will be remembered for his ability to do just that. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thank you so much, Howard, and thank you for the volume you wrote as part of the broader assessment. I see Mike's on here and so many other people who contributed, including Kathleen, who we're gonna, third time is going to be the charm. Kathleen, thank you, Howard.
Oh,
Perfect. Here you
okay.
are. Perfect.
Okay. Am I on?
You are, so you're next up, Kathleen. Thank you.
Oh, well, those of you who know me know that I always have these kinds of challenges. So what can I say? Okay. So I've been a friend and a collaborator and an admirer of Dennis since the 1970s. When I first met him at a conference in Washington, D.C., where I was brought by my advisor, Henry Corintelli. I don't remember the topic of the meeting, but I do remember Dennis. And you know, at that time, I was a graduate student at the Disaster Research Center, and of course, we were always looking over there, you know, to try to find out what was going on in Colorado, you know, at our sister center. And so, you know, I made up my mind that I was going to follow Dennis's career. And it's really interesting because early in the 1980s, I was a postdoc at UCLA. I had a postdoc in evaluation research in the sociology department there. And Jim Goltz, who I had known from graduate school at Ohio State, told me, you know, there's this project going on and it's called the Southern California Earthquake Preparedness Project, SCEP. Maybe you should see if you can go work there as a summer intern. SCEP was a project that was a collaboration between the state of California and FEMA to look at metropolitan areas in California, to look at how they might become more ready for a coming earthquake. And lo and behold, one of the big consultants or advisors on that project was none other than Dennis Mileti. So I started off working for SCEP. My first day at work, they fired the guy that was the head of it. And Dennis and other people who were associated with SCEP developed a number of very interesting and compelling tools for looking at how we deal with seismic risk in high seismic risk areas like Southern California. Then I began in the 80s to follow his work on the Parkfield earthquake prediction, which was a place on the San Andreas Fault where scientists thought that there might be a new earthquake happening. And Dennis's role in that Parkfield project was to look at residents of that area and to explore issues about how you communicate seismic risk to people who are in the middle of this earthquake experiment. And so I was very, very interested in the work that he did in that area, and also broader work in the 1980s on how do you communicate risk, whether it is having to do with people who are under a sort of seismic study or alert, as well as we looked at the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, and there his interest was in aftershock warnings and how do you communicate to people about aftershocks if they happen to be in an area that didn't experience damage in a main shock. So Again, this was very interesting, very, very compelling. In the 90s, it was my privilege to take part in the second assessment of research on natural hazards. And the Mileti effect in that case was the creation of a series of books, a series of articles and special issues of journals. The books were published by the Joseph Henry Press, which was the commercial branch of the National Academy's Press. And the foundational work coming out of that was Dennis's book, Disasters by Design, which was published in 1999. A real watershed hallmark event. Okay, a little personal stuff here. In the year 2000, I was living in Delaware. I was at the Disaster Research Center and a professor at the University of Delaware. I just moved into a new house. You know, we were in boxes and all kinds of stuff like that. We were just in the process of moving. And I get a call from Dennis, and he says, you know, might you be interested in coming to the University of Colorado? You know, we might be looking for a new director. And I'm like, okay, I'm in boxes, but I'm all in. I'm all in. And of course, after that, in 2001, we had the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And here again, Dennis stepped up in a marvelous way to help the National Institute of Standards and Technology try to figure out what happened with the occupants, the people who were in the towers at the time of the terrorist attack. And he was responsible for spearheading a major study of occupant behavior following the 9/11 attacks, a study that unfortunately and regrettably has never seen the light of day. Maybe it will at some point in time. Dennis was a serious scholar, but Dennis was also a passionate one. He believed passionately in the need to bring forward to the public solid information, scientifically based information that they needed to take on board and take into account in order to make themselves safer. He was someone who is not easily replaced. Maybe never replaced. But right now, this evening, I want to raise a glass to my dear, dear friend, Dennis Mileti. This is one of his favorite drinks, a martini with an olive and a twist. So join me in raising a glass to an incomparable and extraordinary person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for that tour of memories, and thank you for the toast, and to those who are sharing in that toast right now. I'm going to read Natasha Mullman's mic isn't working, but I want to read out loud for those who aren't seeing the chat. She said, my mic is not working, but I wanted to share. As a graduate student, Dennis gave a Bill Anderson Fund webinar on the academic job market. He said, and I quote, "If you come from a grad school and you don't teach one class, I don't know what to say to you." Natasha immediately signed up to teach a class. She now has a tenure track academic job. And so cheers to you, Natasha, and thank you for sharing that. And we're gonna follow Natasha with, next up is gonna be Marcia Stein, who is actually one of Dennis's friends from Rancho Mirage, California, who is joining us tonight. So Marcia, over to you.
'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love you. 'Cause you know, I love Am I unmuted?
You sound perfect, Marcia.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I have kind of a funny story too. I was asked by the mayor to take on the Rancho Mirage Emergency Preparedness Commission. So I showed up and there were all these men and Dennis, and I proposed a few things. They'd only been talking about stuff for years. Nothing had ever been done. And I said, you know, I think we need to get into action. And they all quit. And there it was with just Dennis. Couldn't have been any better, right? We got a whole new commission, and we were together for the 7 years that I chaired that commission, and he did amazing town halls, as Lori Peek was part of one of them. And he just was so incredible. And I think what I think of Dennis, it's that he has such a serious message. And yes, he always did it with a sense of humor. You know, he could say something so scary that you just want to run it, leave California immediately and follow it with something pretty funny, and people would relax. But he got the message across, and he did it in such a wonderful way. So we were together for 7 years. And then when I left to go join Coachella Valley Disaster Preparedness Network, which is the entire Coachella Valley, Dennis came with me, and he was our expert. And we've become such dear friends. I miss him terribly. And of course I adore Rick. So it's nice that we have that communication. But thank you, Lori, for doing this. It's very special.
Thank you, Marcia, so much for being here with us. And we're going to have to share the YouTube video of you doing the earthquake safe tour with Dennis through the home. And so we will make sure and post that, because it is a must watch for earthquake preparedness, and with that same sense of seriousness and joy that you just noted. So thank you, Marcia. And thank you for being such an amazing friend to Rick as well. So thank you. And I am going to call on you next, Aronde Drakes, but first I'm going to read a submission from Ann Patton, who's a former journalist, a mitigation champion, a project impact leader, who submitted the following, which is entitled, Dennis the Mentor, Unforgettable, written for this day, July 13th, 2021. Dennis Mileti was really good at unforgettable. He was a master at slamming a rhetorical ball across the net, so to speak, by word or deed, in ways that were never to be forgotten. Dennis delighted in finding ways to shock an audience into remembering his point. But his style was more than shock. He was also a master at what we might call kairos, creating the perfect moment to deliver a specific message with perfect precision, unforgettably. The memories I most treasure are of Dennis, the mentor. I came to the Hazard Center as what you would call a practitioner. But in fact, I was a sponge. I was sopping up whatever wisdom I could from you to take back home to stop our town from washing away. For grassroots people like me, Dennis was wondrously kind and generous with his time and his support. He invested in our struggles and success. He mentored with his great gift of kairos, driving home just the right word, nod, or touch when we most needed it. He made it clear in word and deed that he genuinely respected us. And as you master mentors know, respect empowers. It's a way to remember Dennis Mileti. And here's a quote from Dennis. "It makes me smile to have you in my life," he once wrote to me. Quote, "and how nice it is to know about all the young people behind us who will make great as yet unimagined accomplishments." And I would say in response, it makes me smile to think we were privileged to share this capricious planet with you, Dennis Mileti. I think you must have known that those you mentored would carry on your work even after you were gone from this earth. That's a precious legacy. Dear Dennis, for those of us who had the chance to know you, you are truly unforgettable. Ann Patton, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2021. And with that from Ann Patton, it is perfect to turn this microphone over to the wondrous Aronde Drakes, who was one of Dennis's mentees through the Bill Anderson Fund. And so Aronde, over to you.
And with that, here we are. Thought it wouldn't work. So my experiences with Dennis were limited. I'm probably one of the people who had just the least number of actual interactions with him here, but they were nonetheless really, really impactful. Every time we spoke, I got nervous. For some reason, I'm nervous now. But that would fade away as Dennis started to speak. And so by the time we were actually interacting, it was calm and normal, like if I was just speaking with just one of my friends who I'd known forever. And I really wanted to talk about two things. So my first interaction with Dennis was at the Natural Hazard Workshop, at that wonderful floodplain managers meeting. And I'm wearing my Bill Anderson Fund Disaster Dash shirt today. So be ready for tomorrow, people. Dennis would want you to be. But my very, very first time interacting with Dennis was a phone call. I was a new member of the Bill Anderson Fund, and I didn't have a mentor. And I was walking along campus one day and my phone rang. And I didn't know the number, and I almost didn't pick up because, of course, we know we always have all these spam calls these days. But it was persistent. And I picked up the phone, and it was this voice that I didn't know. And he said, "Hi, Arundi." Strange. Very few people get my name right on the first try. "This is Dennis Mileti." And I go, "Dennis Mileti? Where do I know that name from?" Now I'm a geographer, right? And so we started talking, and he said, "I heard that you didn't have a mentor. I'm volunteering. It'll just be temporary, but I'm all ears." Right after we finished that conversation, I ran into an anthropology student. I'm like, "Dennis Mileti just called me." And she goes, "Dennis Mileti called you?" So I realized that this man was more special than I thought he was. A little while after that, my second call with Dennis, I was actually with a professor. The phone rang, and it was persistent again. So I pulled it out, looked at it, and we both saw Dennis Mileti. The professor looked at me and went, so I left the room, took the call, came back, and the reaction was the same. "Dennis Mileti called you?" And my interactions with that professor have changed from that day. But Dennis was more than this door to knowledge and this door to these other types of interactions. Dennis, in that short period, it was leading up to the Natural Hazards Workshop, and he said, "I'm going to be at the workshop." At the time, I had this nebulous idea, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my dissertation. And he said, "Write 3 or 4 pages, just write your ideas down. We'll meet at the workshop, and we'll have a chat about it." So I said, "Great, fine." Very, very nervous. I'm a new grad student at this point. And I got there, I ran into Dennis in the lobby. He was all, mobbed by people. And he said, "Yeah, did you send it?" And I'd sent it like 2 days before. So I'm like, "Oh man, Dennis hadn't even had a chance to look at this yet." He says, "We're gonna meet tomorrow." He told me where we'd meet in the lobby, and what time. And I get there the next day, and I sit down, and he pats me and he says, "Okay." So I took a look at what you were writing, and we started talking about it. I now just wanted to have an idea of what makes sense for a dissertation. Dennis took that and said, "Okay, these points are really good for a dissertation, but what do you want to do for a career? What are the alternative tracks and the parallel tracks that you can keep here and that'll help you to build a career?" And then he said, "Pretend you're speaking to the UN in Guyana." And I realized Dennis had read my background. Dennis came prepared not just with the work in hand, but he took time to look into my background to see what I was interested in outside of those notes. And it really struck me that this very, very busy man, this giant of the field, was humble enough to sit down with a grad student who was trying to find his way. This retired man who has better things to do, to say, okay, this guy is interested in these things. How do these fit with the background that he has? You know, what are the things that actually make sense that he'll want to do 10, 20, 30 years down the line? And I still carry a lot of that with me today, thinking, these are interesting points, but I should probably save these for later, stick to these that I need to get done now, and see how I can work these nebulous ideas into a research plan that serves me for the long term. And so, yeah, I've met him only a few times, but the impact of Dennis Mileti will stay with me forever. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Aronde. And you're reminding me of something that Rick recently told me. That Rick said, sometimes I would walk by Dennis's office and I would know he was on the phone with a graduate student because he was just filled with so much delight. And so Dennis always loved having a phone call more than email. And it is just so great to hear that story. And thank you for sharing, Aronde. And we have about 29 minutes left in this session. And so if others would like to share, please do go ahead and put your name in the chat box and I'll call on you. No pressure, but if you would like to, I will call on you. And next up, I am going to call on Dave Ramsey. Dave.
Hello, Lori, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. I'm kind of like Aronde that I didn't meet Dennis until much later than many of the people that are here on the call today. But I knew about his work a lot longer than even the time before I met him, because Carolyn Dreger, who's at my office, the Cascades Volcano Observatory, and who does all of our outreach work, she's our outreach coordinator, she had met Dennis at one of the workshops in the late 90s and had been awed by his ideas about how to work with emergency managers. His concept of how Earth scientists need to work with emergency managers, meet them where they can be met, meet them on their turf, have conversations that aren't just one and done. You just don't throw a hazards assessment at them and run away. You have a conversation about it. It's a long-term relationship. It's a long-term conversation. And that's basically all of the outreach and all of the work that we do in emergency management, pretty much in the whole volcano hazards program, is based upon Dennis Mileti's work. And Carolyn's very sure to mention that in presentations that she did. And so I knew his work, I had read the references, I knew all these things. And then I went to a meeting that they had invited Dennis to where we were looking at some USGS seismic hazard maps. And the maps were up on the screen and people were asked to comment on the maps. And folks in the room were, of course, looking at very scientific and very in the weeds kind of things. People are like, well, I don't know about the color scheme. Well, I don't know about what you're doing with the legend there. Oh, I don't know about the labels and all these things. And Dennis took a moment, he said, if I may. And he said, with this map, I think you've really managed to explain the hazard very well to very few people. And I thought, oh, wow, like this is the Mileti effect. This is the moment, everyone in the room was just, wow, yeah, okay, yes, this is what we should be thinking about. And the whole focus of this meeting changed. And everyone spent the rest of the time focusing on, well, how are these maps going to be received by people? How are people going to use these and get interested in what's on them to go find out steps they should take next? It reframed the entire meeting in a couple sentences. And I thought, I need to have some conversations with this guy. This is someone that I need to chat with him. And so I was fortunate enough to do so at that meeting, others that he came to, and also at the workshops. I always learned something. I always was impressed that he was able to take some time to talk to a rock guy like myself. I thought that was really, really nice, when he could probably have much more meaningful and deep conversations with other sociologists or geographers or people that were more in the vein. But I always learned something from him, and I'll definitely miss those conversations. They were always a highlight of the workshops, and with the way the workshops are arranged, it was, you know, easy to have them in the hallway as you were moving from one thing to the other. So I definitely miss him, although I know that his work and his effect on our work is going to go on for a long, long time.
Dave, thank you so much for that. And I know Dennis loved rock guys. And so thank you for being with us and sharing that. And I wanted to share that Jim Goltz, who knew Dennis for decades, sent me a private message and said he'd love to say something, but his audio unfortunately isn't working so well, but he's loving listening to the stories from all of you. So Jim, thanks for being a friend and a colleague of Dennis's for so many years, and for all the ways that I know you mutually inspired one another. And so next up, I am going to call on Louise Comfort, and then I'm going to call on Paul O'Brien and Michael Radelet. So Louise, you are next.
Thanks. It's been a joy to listen to all of the memories of Dennis over the years. And I met him, of course, in my very first workshop in 1985. And I was honestly in the room at that 2017 earthquake and wrote my check. And there were many, many other things because I was interested in information. And Dennis would ask me, information, but how do you communicate that information? I was part of the second assessment and contributed my, modest part to that. But the memory that I would really like to share was one that doesn't come forward very much. And that was Dennis's really strong interest in building international relationships and communicating internationally and with international is of the Canadian Conference for the IDNDR and in Vancouver, and it was a lovely conference in Vancouver, and there was a cruise out in the Vancouver Bay when all of the members attending the conference were invited to the conference. And here was Dennis with a glass of wine in his hand with the mountains of Vancouver behind us, this glorious city. And Dennis said, what we can do together, Canada and the US, if we combine our focus on disaster mitigation, we can address the San Andreas, the earthquake faults all down the western coast of the Americas. And his focus was really on building that connection in Canada. And I remember our Canadian colleagues who come to the National Workshop and how Dennis would greet them. And that is a memory that I will always keep, and that has honestly underscored my own interest in international communication and building international disaster resilience. We will remember him.
Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing that memory. And yeah, just thank you so much. And now we're going to move over to Paul O'Brien.
Okay, I have to unmute myself. Lori, thank you very much for doing this. It's really wonderful to hear all this. You know, I've been taking notes the whole time and I have 2 pages, so I really have to be succinct in what I say. I met Dennis when I entered the PhD program as a grad student at Colorado State University in 1989, and my first 2 years were doing coursework. And I commuted with a fellow graduate student because I lived in Denver. My wife was working there. And so driving up, 5 times a day, Denver, Fort Collins. But back then, you actually could do the speed limit. Today you can't anymore. It's so crowded. In the 3rd year, things changed. The graduate student I was driving up with, she was doing something else, and I became that year Dennis's TA. And he said, hey, let's go together. We can commute together. So, I mean, just this, person, this faculty member, wants to drive with me. It was just amazing. So, he and I drove Monday, Wednesday, Friday, drove up. He taught, I was his TA. Tuesdays, we would go up and he would have his office hours. I would meet students, and Thursday was research. And that's really what a big thing that Dennis gave me was just a work ethic and to stick to something. And I saw his Thursdays, his whole life, at least at CSU, was dedicated to doing research. And I really took that on myself. And, I got a tenure track assistant professor position, moved up the ranks to associate, then full. I was chair of my department and just retired last year. So those early things he taught me gave me a successful career. And how can you thank someone for that? I mean, it's just amazing. But in this time period, there was so much going on. He was doing his Parkfield research that Kathleen mentioned. Then my dissertation was the Loma Prieta earthquake, 1989, looking at aftershock warnings. And the whole time, I'm driving with this guy, 4 hours a day in the car, Denver, Fort Collins, Denver, Fort Collins, having all these discussions. And I was in my comprehensive exams, theory and methods and social change. And just, he was a broad thinker. He was an incredible thinker, of where all this went. And once my dissertation was written and done, I then helped Jo Darlington, who's smiling here on the screen. She did an organizational analysis, which was totally new for me. And I don't want to step on her toes, but I helped collect data. And so 2 of us, we'd fly. We had a condo in San Francisco. 2 of us would fly out. We'd do interviews for 2 weeks. Then we'd fly back to Denver and 2 other researchers would come out. So we did this month after month after month, and you get to know people when you live like that, And Dennis was a gentleman. He was a thinker. He was just an incredible mentor for me and so many other people. And I'll tell you about the DIME strategy in just a minute, but man, he taught 3 classes, 150 students each, big lecture rooms. He worked with 3 or 4 graduate students. This is at CSU. He traveled around the country giving lectures, and many have mentioned about that. And, still, he and I driving back and forth 3 days a week, talking methods, Earl Babby, Curlinger, how all these things get together, research methodologies. But we were stuck on something. We sent out my surveys that would be my dissertation data to the Bay Area, asking about people's experiences with aftershock warnings. And we sent it out. We bought a sample from a company. It was funded by NSF, as was Parkfield, as was Joe's dissertation. And he and I, we talked just endlessly. What would the response rate be? What's legitimate? 20%, 30%? What are people saying? How do you get it that it's legitimate when you do your path analysis, that you can, generalize to the population? So these were the discussions he and I had. And, what's the response rate going to be? 60%, 70%, everyone's interested in this topic. But we got it back and it was like 38%. We're like, So we taught, how can we raise it? How can, we're going to do a second wave. How can we do this? And Dennis had this light bulb went off during one of our conversations. He said, let's incentivize it. Yeah? So we talked about it. Okay, incentivize, how can we do it? And so what we did was on the second survey, we had a thing saying, here is a 10 cents for your thoughts on this topic. So Dennis had to do this. Just the bureaucracy, getting like $300 in dimes from the cashier's office at CSU had to explain, okay, this is NSF money and you want $300 in dimes. Are you kidding? What's going on? They finally approved it. I got the dimes and I went out and bought glue, and I glued a dime on every survey, the second survey that went out. We mailed it out, and it did increase the response rate to about 65%, I think, was the end result. But for me, it shows Dennis. He was a thinker, just really on a macro level scale, but he could also talk dimes. How are we going to increase the response so that it's legitimate? And for me, that really speaks to him in so many ways of, the man who was above it all in a way, but he was right down in the details and totally involved with it. So I know we're short on time. I don't want to take other people's times, but he impacted my life. He gave me a fabulous career. As I said, I just retired as a full professor from the California State University system. What can I say? I kind of owe him my career. Yeah. So Lori, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing that. I have never heard him tell that story about the dimes. And so thank you for that. And thank you for being with us this evening. Thank you. And now I'm going to call on Mike Radelet. Oh, and Mike, you are muted.
There we go. Thank you. I followed Dennis as chair of the sociology department in Boulder. Before that, I was chair for 5 years at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And when I was being recruited at Colorado, Dennis promised me that I would never have to be an administrator again. And that promise lasted basically until I unpacked the boxes in Boulder, and he asked me to chair the graduate committee back in 2001. But with all these memories of Dennis, I think I want to talk about two other areas of Dennis's professional contributions that I didn't hear. I was a little bit late, but I haven't heard anybody speak about. One is that Dennis was an absolutely masterful teacher. And the second was that he was a masterful administrator at universities. Let me talk about the latter first. To be a department chair, at that time we had 24 faculty, was a full-time job. And Dennis would be running the disaster center in the morning and come over to the sociology department in the afternoon, and really built the sociology department at the University of Colorado. And he only got sued once, as far as I know. He won that case. But there were 24 faculty in those days, and there were numerous challenges that arose as an administrator that Dennis handled, always in a calm fashion, and always with great skill and wisdom. Patty Adler's on the call today, and Kathleen is on the call. And every year we'd evaluate the faculty as the executive committee. And Dennis would bring in a feast into his office, food for 20 people. And the 5 people of the executive committee would sit around and do the evaluations. We'd start at 9 in the morning and go through 5:30 or 6 o'clock and do them all. And he'd express concern about graduate students. I remember one time he was very concerned about Lori Peek, the most organized graduate student in the world. And he was concerned because he'd gone by her office and there were only 2 number 2 lead pencils sharpened carefully so that she could take notes from her reading. So he was concerned that she might miss some important facts if the lead on the pencil broke. Dennis retired from the university in May of 2004. I remember he did the department's commencement, probably 750 people were there. And he came back to the office and he had his green Colorado State robe And he took it off, shook it out, handed it to me and said, I hereby donate this to the sociology department. I'm done. And literally, he walked out of the building and never stepped foot in it again as an administrator. He had big shoes to fill. I'll only say a couple words about him as a teacher. I attended, I don't know, handful of lectures that he gave. We have a big lecture theater in Boulder, seats 479 people. Lori Peek is very familiar with that room, and Patty Adler, who's on with us today, had the students eating out of her hands for, I don't know, many, many years teaching the big section of deviance. And I don't know, I've never seen Dennis do a PowerPoint. Am I right that he didn't know PowerPoint? I don't know, maybe in his older age, he learned how to do it, but he sure as shit never did it in the classroom. And it would write on the overhead projectors, beamed up in the front of the room, an outline of his lecture as it emerged. And he was just an absolutely masterful teacher. His course evaluations were sky high, and the students absolutely loved him, both undergraduate and graduate students. So I thought you all, especially those of you who have not been been on the campus in Boulder a lot, would want to realize that Dennis's professional writing and his grants were really only about 1/3 of his professional contributions. In my memory, he will go down as a terrific role model as department chair, and also a role model as a teacher, and a role model as a person. I'll carry his memory with me forever. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you, Mike, for being with us and for sharing that additional dimension of who Dennis was and what he's breathed into the world. And about 6 weeks ago, I had the chance to go and see Rick and Rancho Mirage, and we cleaned out many of Dennis's papers together. And one of the greatest things that I found was Dennis had this handwritten, it was a 3-hole punch binder from when he taught Introduction to Sociology, handwritten, every lecture note that he used in that class. And you are right, Mike, let rattle it, not a PowerPoint slide, brilliance written out in long form in a number 2 pencil. And that book is sitting down in the Natural Hazard Center library right now. And so I hope when we're all back in Boulder that everybody's going to get to take a look at that brilliance in that book. So thank you, Mike. And we have about 8 minutes left in this session, and Ann Wine from the United States Geological Survey, I understand, would like to speak. And so Ann, we're going to turn it over to you.
Uh-oh. My video is not starting.
And we can hear you though, which is great to hear your voice.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, how exciting, I get a chance. I'm not going to talk very long, but I just wanted to say that we're really grateful at USGS for how he helped us with our USGS-led scenarios that have carried on forever. And he provided advice, support, and contributed to those. And since then, I've stayed in touch with him an email and just whenever I've been in the same workshop with him. And he would like to sign his emails as the guru to me, but and he would take any question. And I just can't believe how incredibly patient he was with me. And I think he's just such a patient person, and no question was too silly. And he even invited me to go visit him at his place, which I did for lunch, and he gave me a whole day. And just incredibly inspired by his generosity and patience. And I want to say that there was one day he sent me an email back and he said, I think you can be a real social scientist now, because I'm not really one. But anyway, that was very precious.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you for sharing that, Ann. And I'm not sure if you're calling in from New Zealand or in the US, but thank you for being with us this evening. And everyone, we have about 6 minutes left in this session, and I didn't see anybody else's name in the chat box, but would anybody else like to, oh, Walt Peacock said maybe a short comment. So, Walt, but we would love to hear from you.
I don't know if you can see me or not. Can you?
We can't see you, and I'm so sorry. I don't know why some videos aren't working, but we can hear you, which is the important part. So thank you.
Great. I have, I wrote something in the tribute thing, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I was extremely fortunate to be a graduate student on a NSF project led by Fred Bates, in which Dennis was involved in for a number of years. And, I mean, he was just so important in my career, a great role model. And, so I will never have the ability of to actually, have the organization skills and have so many things under control as Dennis had. But I also want to say that Dennis knew his limits and also knew who had more power than him in some ways. And I just like to mention this one story, and that is, I was at that time I was at Florida International University, and I first time I came to the hazards workshop, I think it was in 1993, in the summer of 1993. And, kept coming. And one of the things that would happen periodically is that, after the workshop sessions, the researchers would kind of be licking their wounds in terms of, you eggheads, why don't you, those kinds of comments, which are perfectly legitimate. Don't get me wrong, or anything along those lines. But also participation by researchers seemed to be kind of waning a little bit. And so, we had a bunch of us had talked about, trying to create a researchers workshop afterwards, or a researchers roundup afterwards, or a researchers meeting afterwards, which is still continuing to this day. So, but we went over to talk to Dennis and figure, okay, so if we can get Dennis's okay, we're in and stuff. And Dennis, this was late into the barbecue, and Dennis with his cigarette flying around and his cup as well too said, yes, absolutely. If we want to do this, if you want to do this, yes, we should do this. And then he hesitated and he said, wait, come with me. And we walked around, this was at the Millennium, walked around, and stuff, and he was looking for somebody. And then finally he brought me in front of the real boss, and that was Mary Fran Myers. And he said, Walt, if you can convince her, you can do this. So he always deferred to Mary Myers in terms of running that workshop and everything else and stuff. He empowered those that were around him, enabled them to excel, and he was just so supportive in that way and stuff too. So he was a great man and will be terribly missed. Thank you. That's it.
Oh, thank you, Walt, and thank you for giving us a little history on the emergence of the researchers meeting, which I actually never knew. And so thank you for that story. And thank you, everyone, for being on here this evening. So many of the people who joined us this evening have written a series of beautiful tributes that are posted on the Natural Hazard Center website. If you just go to hazards.colorado.edu, there's a picture of Dennis and Gilbert and Mary Fran right on the front, and you can click on that. And if you have a memory, a tribute, a way that Dennis impacted your life, we would love to have it. We've been sharing that with Rick and Dennis's family, and it has really meant a lot to people in a lot of different places. So we invite your tributes, and we thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for keeping Dennis's spirit alive. I know one thing that we've always believed is that a person may leave their body, but they don't leave this earth as long as we speak their names and we speak their memories and we remember the legacies that they have granted to all of us. And so thank you for doing that this evening, all of you who shared and all of you who were just here to listen. and to learn just as Dennis loved. And so with that, thank you so, so much. And we hope you all have a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And much love to all of you. Have a good night. Thank you. Jen, thank you so much for playing that video of Dennis. I don't know if I could have gotten it to play, so thank you for doing that.
I just think I'm going to keep the video going because people keep on writing in the comments. So I want to
thank you.
Allow that to play out. What an amazing session.
Beautiful.